Evelyn Harper, 72, lived alone in a small cottage by the coast of Maine. Every morning, she brewed a cup of black tea and opened the window to let in the sound of the waves. Her life was as calm and steady as the tide until the day her daughter Clara came to clean out the attic and discovered an old wooden box. Its lock rusted with time. Inside the box, alongside faded photographs, was an envelope that had never been mailed. It was dated May 1969. The handwriting was shaky, but elegant. In the corner of the letter was a name, Samuel. Clara asked Mom, "Who's Samuel?" Evelyn froze. For more than half a century, she had never spoken that name aloud. Her eyes drifted toward the distant horizon, as if searching for someone long. Lost to the sea dot, she knew that if she opened that door, all the memories she had locked away for decades would come rushing back the summer of 1969. The small cafe by the harbor and a promise that had never been kept. Clara pressed her gently, wanting to know the story. But Evelyn only said, "One day when you're ready to hear it." That night, Evelyn lay awake in bed. She took the letter from the box, her hands trembling as she traced each line. She had long since memorized the words, though she had never read them aloud. Outside, the ocean whispered against the shore, as if urging her to finally open the door to the past. She knew she didn't have much time left. And if she didn't tell this story now, it might vanish forever. Asterisk. Evelyn remembered the summer of 1969 as vividly as if it had been yesterday. She was only 16 then, fresh out of high school, bursting with dreams of leaving the tiny harbor town she had known all her life. Every afternoon, she helped her parents at their little seaside cafe, a modest place, always filled with the comforting scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the temps of salt in the air. One warm afternoon in June, while she was wiping down the counter, the door creaked open and a stranger stepped inside. He wore a slightly wrinkled white shirt, faded jeans, and around his neck hung an old camera. He smiled politely and asked for a black coffee and a slice of apple pie. "Are you a photographer?" Evelyn asked, nodding toward the camera. "Yes," he replied with a gentle nod. "My name's Samuel. I travel along these coastal towns, capturing life by the sea." His voice was deep and warm, like the low hum of waves against the shore. In the days that followed, Samuel became a regular. He always took the same seat by the window overlooking the harbor, sipping his coffee while jotting notes into a small, leather-bound notebook. Slowly, their conversations grew longer. Samuel told her about his travels, the faces he had photographed, and his dream of publishing a book filled with portraits of the sea and the people who lived by it. Evelyn, who had never set foot beyond the town's edge, found in his stories a kind of freedom she had never dared to imagine. She began to look forward to the moments when the bell above the cafe door would chime and Samuel would walk in, smiling as if the day had been waiting for him to arrive. One evening, as the setting sun poured molten gold over the water, Samuel invited Evelyn down to the pier. They sat side by side, the boards creaking softly beneath them. And he showed her a handful of photographs he had taken that week. Children laughing as they chased each other along the sand. Fishermen repairing their nets under the fading light. Seagulls gliding effortlessly against a backdrop of endless blue. "Evelyn, I'll be leaving at the end of this summer," Samuel said quietly. "Why do you say it like you won't be coming back?" she asked, forcing a smile, though a heaviness had already begun to settle in her chest. "Because I'm not sure I will," he admitted. "My life, it doesn't follow a straight path. But I want you and me to remember this summer, always." They promised to write to each other. And if fate allowed, Samuel would return the next summer. Evelyn clung to that promise as if it were carved into stone. But just weeks later, Samuel was gone without a goodbye, without a note. The cafe felt emptier, the harbor quieter. And then, one crisp September morning, a letter arrived not from Samuel, but from a stranger. Inside was a photograph of Evelyn and Samuel together, and a single line written in a neat hand. "He wanted you to have this. He's sorry." Evelyn had written back a long, trembling letter filled with questions, hopes, and the quiet ache of someone left behind. But she had never sent it. That letter was the same one Clara had just found decades later, tucked away in the old wooden box in the attic. Clara placed the ivory-colored envelope on the kitchen table. All morning, she had tried to strike up a conversation, but her mother remained silent. Evelyn made tea, her movements slow and deliberate, as if stretching every second to avoid facing the question. "Mom, I don't understand. If this person meant so much to you, why did you never send the letter?" Clara asked, her voice gentle yet firm. Evelyn gave a faint smile, but her eyes carried a deep, unshakable sadness. "Some things, my dear people, keep to themselves. Because once you send them away, you can't have them back." Clara wasn't sure how to make sense of that. She glanced at the letter, then at her mother, noticing the subtle tremor in her hands. After lunch, when Clara went out to buy groceries, Evelyn sat alone in the kitchen. She opened the envelope, revealing a sheet of paper, its edges yellowed with time, though the handwriting remained clear and steady. She read each line again, the words she had written on an autumn night decades ago, in a small room lit by a kerosene lamp. "Samuel, I don't know where you are or if this letter will ever find you. But I want you to know that summer was the greatest gift I have ever received. I can still hear the waves whenever I close my eyes, still remember the smell of the coffee you made me that first day. If one day you come back, I will be here, waiting as I was the day you left." She could recall vividly the moment she folded the letter, fully intending to send it. But the very next day, news from the town's post office changed everything. The mailman told her that a young man about Samuel's age, carrying a camera, had been in an accident while traveling by boat to Boston. No one could confirm the man's identity, but in his pocket was a notebook that matched Samuel's perfectly. That news extinguished the last flicker of hope. Evelyn kept the letter, no longer as a message, but as a keepsake. She placed it in a wooden box along with a few photographs, locked it, and never opened it again until Clara found it. When Clara returned home, she found her mother sitting, motionless, staring out the window at the shimmering whitecaps dancing across the waves. "Mom, what are you thinking about?" Clara asked quietly. Evelyn answered softly, without turning her gaze from the sea. "I'm thinking maybe it's time to tell you everything. But this story, it isn't only about Samuel. It's also about what I did after he disappeared." In her voice, Clara heard not only longing, but something else as well, something that sounded a lot like regret. Evelyn began to speak, her voice slow and deliberate, as if retracing each step in her memory. "After I heard the news about Samuel's accident, I cried for many nights," she said softly. "But you know, sometimes the heart refuses to believe what the mind accepts." A few years later, Evelyn got married. Clara's father was a good man, a carpenter who loved his wife and daughter dearly. Their life was simple and steady until one spring day in 1978. When Evelyn was wandering through a farmer's market in a town more than 100 miles from home, she was browsing baskets of apples when her eyes were drawn to a stall selling landscape photographs. On the wooden rack, among dozens of images, there was one that made her almost drop her basket. It was a picture of a small boat docked at a harbor, bathed in golden sunset light, and a young girl leaning against the rail of the boat. Girl was her at 16. The floral dress, the long hair, and the smile Samuel had captured that day. It was unmistakable. Evelyn's hands trembled as she asked, "The vendor who took this photograph?" The man smiled. "That one came from a traveling photographer. I bought the collection at a flea market in another state. He never signs his name, only leaves a little mark in the corner." Evelyn bent down to look closely at the corner of the print. Her heart clenched. It was the very symbol Samuel used to draw in his notebook, 2 wavy lines and a small star. She asked again, "Do you know where he is now?" "No, ma'am. Heard he still wanders along the coasts." Some say he's been spotted in the South, others claim as far as Alaska. That night, Evelyn returned home without saying a word to her husband. She retrieved the wooden box, opened the unsent letter, and wondered, if Samuel is alive, why hasn't he come back for me? I once thought about leaving everything behind to find him. Evelyn admitted, her sigh heavy, but you were only 3 years old then, and I knew if I went, I'd lose my family. Clara sat in silence. She had never imagined her mother standing at such a crossroads. So, did you ever try to find him? Clara asked quietly. Evelyn met her daughter's gaze. Yes, but that was many years later. When I was alone and when it seemed far too late, her eyes drifted somewhere far away, as though the story was about to shift into an entirely new chapter. No longer the memories of youth, but the journey of searching for a shadow that had vanished for decades. Asterisk when Evelyn was 64. Her husband passed away after a sudden illness. The seaside house became strangely quiet. Every morning she still brewed tea, but now there was only 1 cup instead of 2. That loss made her think more about the things she had never done, and one of them was finding Samuel one winter evening. While clearing out the bookshelf, she found an old newspaper clipping tucked inside a notebook. On the page, in the art photography section, there was a familiar picture, a child playing on the sand, with the same symbol of 2 waves and a small star in the corner. The caption read, Photo S.J. Maine Coast, 2009. Her heart pounded. S.J. Samuel Jameson. A few weeks later, Evelyn sold some belongings and rented a small room near the town where the photograph had been taken. She asked around in cafes and at the harbor, but no one seemed to know exactly who the old wandering photographer was. Some said they had seen him near the old lighthouse at the tip of the peninsula, a place few people visited. One afternoon, a sky thick with fog, Evelyn walked there. Waves crashed violently against the cliffs. And then she saw him, a tall, slender figure with silver hair. Setting up a camera pointed toward the sea, she stood still, her heart a mix of hope and fear. Samuel. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. The man turned. His face was lined with deep wrinkles, but his gray eyes were still as deep and warm as ever. He looked at her for a few seconds, then smiled faintly. Evelyn, they sat on the stone steps beside the lighthouse. Samuel told her that when he left town in 1969, he'd planned to return, but a family crisis and matters he didn't want her involved in had kept him away. The accident she had heard about back then, it wasn't him, but a traveling companion. I meant to find you, Samuel said, his voice low. But when I learned you had married, I thought it best to let you live in peace. Evelyn was silent. Over the past half-century, she had felt anger, sorrow, pain, and longing, but now there was only stillness. They talked until night fully fell, and then Samuel walked her back to town. Before partying, he handed her an envelope. These are all the photographs I ever took of you. I've kept them for 50 years. She held it, feeling as if she was carrying an entire lifetime of memories in her hands. But she also knew there would be no next summer anymore. Asterisk, the next morning. Evelyn woke up early. The first light of day slipped through the curtains, spilling across the envelope Samuel had given her the night before. She touched it gently, as if afraid that opening it would unleash the memories she had kept sealed for half a century, memories that, once freed, could never be put back. Outside, the town was still peaceful. The distant chime of the church bells rang through the air, and the scent of fresh bread drifted from the bakery at the corner. Evelyn brewed tea, but this time she poured 2 cups. One for herself and one to remind her that Samuel might still be out there somewhere. Perhaps only a few streets away. She opened the envelope. Inside were faded photographs, her standing by the dock, smiling. Her sitting on a wooden bench, reading. Her running along the shore, her dress billowing in the wind. Each picture carried the light of youth and the summer of 1969, and on the back of each, Samuel had written a simple line. So, I never forgot. Evelyn lingered over the last. Photographed the longest. In it, Samuel had taken their reflection in a foggy cafe, mirror both of them smiling, their hands just barely touching. Her heart ached. Part of her wanted to leave the house, walk to the lighthouse and say, "Stay, we've lost enough time. Already." But another part whispered that maybe the most beautiful thing was to keep this as a final gift. Not every story needs a new chapter. Some are best left closed while still intact. That afternoon, Evelyn walked to the sea. She carried the unsent letter and one of Samuel's photographs. When she reached the water's edge, she released them, letting the waves carry them away. "Goodbye, Samuel," she whispered. And for the first time in many years, she felt light. On her way home, she found Clara waiting at the door. Clara embraced her, asking nothing, simply holding her hand tightly. Evelyn knew that one chapter of her life had ended, but another filled with her daughter, and the days she had left was just beginning. And in the distant sound of the waves, she could almost hear Samuel's voice. "I never forgot." Asterisk, perhaps in every life, there exists an unsent letter. It doesn't have to be words written on paper. It might be an unspoken apology, an embrace never given, or a simple "I miss you" kept hidden in the heart. Evelyn had held on to her letter for over 50 years. She didn't send it not because it didn't matter, but because sometimes we keep something as part of ourselves. And when the moment comes to let it go, you realize we haven't truly lost it. We've simply placed it where it belongs, in memory, in the heart. If you're listening to this story, maybe someone has come to mind. Perhaps it's an old friend, a past love, or a family member you haven't spoken to in years. Ask yourself, could today be the day you send your letter? Whatever the outcome, at least you'll know you didn't let time steal the chance. From you, and if you've ever had an unsent letter like Evelyn's, I invite you to share it in the comments. Who knows, your story might be the inspiration someone needs to step past their fear and take that first step toward RECONNECTION, because sometimes the most precious thing isn't whether two people end up together. It's knowing that somewhere out there, there was once someone who never forgot. Asterisk.